Max Verstappen finished second in first practice and fourth in second practice. Yet his radio told a completely different story. He said the Red Bull felt like it was driving with a handbrake on, then reported rear axle locking, front wing trouble, and even a seating position that left him feeling too reclined. The shocking part is that he was still within 7/10 of the fastest time. So was Red Bull hiding serious pace? Or was Verstappen exposing a car he could no longer trust? The answer changes everything about their Hungarian weekend. Subscribe to the channel. Friday practice is supposed to reveal whether a car is ready to fight at the front. For Max Verstappen, it revealed something far more disturbing. The timing screen showed a Red Bull near the top, second fastest in the opening session, only 484 thousandths of a second behind Charles Leclerc. That looked competitive. It looked controlled. It even looked like Red Bull had arrived in Hungary with enough speed to challenge Ferrari. But the stopwatch was hiding the real story. Inside the car, Verstappen was fighting a machine that did not feel free. His description was brutally simple. Driving the Red Bull felt like driving with the handbrake on. That is not the kind of message a team wants to hear from its lead driver, especially at the Hungaroring. This circuit gives drivers almost no time to recover. One corner flows into another, then another. If the car refuses to rotate properly at the beginning of a sequence, the driver carries that problem through the entire section. A tiny hesitation becomes lost speed. Lost speed becomes pressure, and pressure becomes frustration. Imagine trying to sprint while someone is pulling against your jacket. You can still move quickly. You may even outrun most people around you, but every step demands more effort, and you know you are not reaching your true speed. That was the contradiction surrounding Verstappen. He was second fastest, but he did not sound encouraged. He sounded trapped. And that matters, because Verstappen can often produce a strong lap even when the car beneath him is behaving badly. His position on the timing screen does not always reveal how difficult the lap felt. Sometimes it reveals how much he managed to hide. This is where Red Bull's real problem began. If the car had been clearly slow, the engineers would have known exactly what they were chasing. More grip, better balance, greater straight line speed. But the Red Bull was not clearly slow. It was fast enough to create hope, while uncomfortable enough to create doubt. That is a far more dangerous situation. A driver can adapt to a car with an obvious weakness. He knows when time is being lost. He knows what to protect. But when a car feels restricted in one corner and unstable in another, confidence begins to disappear. And at Hungary, confidence under braking is everything. The driver must slow the car while preparing to change direction almost immediately. There is no room to fight the steering wheel, wait for the rear to settle, or wonder whether the tires will respond. The car must feel predictable. Verstappen's message suggested it did not. There was also another detail Red Bull could not ignore. The team was not using the distinctive rear wing it had tested 1 week earlier in Belgium, the wing that had become known as the Macarena wing. The source does not prove that removing it caused Verstappen's problem, but it does show that Red Bull was still searching for the correct balance from one circuit to the next. Belgium had brought Verstappen his third podium of the season. Hungary immediately brought complaints. That contrast made the radio message even more important. Was the progress from Belgium genuine, or had Red Bull simply found a temporary solution that worked at one circuit? The answer would not come from first practice alone. Red Bull still had another session to adjust the car, study the data, and release the speed Verstappen believed was being held back. But when second practice began, the problem did not disappear. It changed shape, and the next radio message was far more serious. Second practice should have been the moment Red Bull proved the morning problem was under control. Instead, Verstappen's radio became even more alarming. The car was still fast. That was the confusing part. Lewis Hamilton led the session for Ferrari with a time of 1 minute, 18.729 seconds. Verstappen finished fourth, 692 thousandths behind, less than 7/10. Again, the result looked respectable. Again, the driver sounded anything but comfortable. At one stage, Verstappen climbed to third place provisionally. On his decisive soft tire run, he finished only 193 thousandths behind Lando Norris. That gap was small enough to suggest Red Bull still had real performance. But then came the message that changed the entire meaning of the session. Verstappen reported rear axle locking in the braking zones. That sounds technical, but the feeling is simple. When a driver presses a brake pedal, he expects the car to slow down in a straight, controlled, predictable way. The front and rear of the car must work together. If the rear axle begins locking, that stability can disappear. The back of the car becomes nervous. It can feel light. It can start moving before the driver wants it to move. Imagine running down a wet staircase while wearing shoes with almost no grip. You may know exactly where you want to place your foot, but the moment you commit, you are no longer completely certain it will stay there. Now imagine facing that uncertainty while braking from enormous speed. That is why Verstappen's message mattered. A driver cannot attack a braking zone if he does not trust the rear of the car. He may brake earlier. He may turn it more carefully. He may wait before returning to the throttle. Each decision costs only a fraction of a second, but those fractions begin to multiply. And at the Hungaroring, one compromised corner can damage the next 2 or 3. The driver loses rotation. Then he loses the ideal line. Then he reaches the next corner from the wrong position. The problem spreads through the lap. But rear axle locking was not the first concern Verstappen had reported during the session. 6 minutes earlier, he had already mentioned an issue involving debris in the front wing. The exact technical details were not explained, so there is no evidence of a major failure. But the message introduced another variable, another distraction, another reason for Verstappen to question what the car was doing beneath him. The front wing controls how the air reaches the front of the car. It helps create the grip that allows the driver to turn into a corner. Even a small concern around that area can matter, because the driver depends on the front of the car to respond immediately. Think of opening a door with a loose handle. The door may still open, but every time you touch it, you wonder whether it will respond normally. That uncertainty changes how confidently you use it. For Verstappen, the uncertainty was beginning to appear at both ends of the car. A front wing concern at one moment, rear axle locking a few minutes later, and then came a complaint that almost sounded too ordinary to matter: his seating position. Verstappen said he felt as though he was lying down too much inside the Red Bull. That may sound like a comfort problem. It was more important than that. A Formula One driver sits extremely low in the car. His legs stretch forward. His shoulders are tightly supported. His head is surrounded by protective structures. Everything is positioned with precision. The seat affects how the driver sees the track. It affects how he reaches the steering wheel. It affects how pressure travels through his back when he brakes. It even affects how connected he feels to the movement of the car. Move the seat in a normal road car by a small amount, and the whole experience changes. The pedals feel different. The steering feels different. Your view of the road changes. Now take that discomfort into a car where the driver is searching for thousandths of a second. Suddenly, a small seating issue is not small at all. And this is where the pattern became impossible to ignore. Verstappen was not complaining about one isolated problem. He was describing several separate issues in the same afternoon: the front wing, the rear axle, the braking behavior, the seating position. Each complaint pointed toward a different area, but together they created one larger problem. The driver did not feel fully connected to the car. That is the one thing no team can solve by simply pointing at the timing screen. Red Bull could say the car was fourth fastest. The data could show that Verstappen remained close to Norris. The engineers could identify sections where the lap time looked competitive, but none of that could replace trust. Trust is what allows a driver to brake 5 meters later. Trust is what allows him to carry more speed into a corner. Trust is what allows him to correct a slide without hesitation. And Verstappen's messages suggested that trust was disappearing. The most revealing connection was between the morning and afternoon complaints. In first practice, the car felt as though the handbrake was on. In second practice, the rear axle was locking under braking. Those were not identical symptoms, but both were connected to the same critical phase of the lap: slowing the car, transferring its weight, preparing it to turn. When a Formula One car brakes, its weight moves toward the front. The front tires are pressed harder into the track. the rear becomes lighter. If that movement is not controlled properly, the driver can feel resistance in one corner and instability in another. Imagine carrying a tray filled with drinks. Move too slowly and you lose time. Move too suddenly and everything slides. The goal is not just to move quickly. The goal is to control the weight while moving quickly. That was Red Bull's challenge. The car seemed to have speed, but Verstappen could not access that speed cleanly in every part of the lap, and that created a dangerous illusion. From outside the garage, fourth place looked fine. Inside the cockpit, Verstappen was sending warnings. This is why the second session changed the story. The morning complaint could have been dismissed as an early setup issue. The afternoon complaints proved the discomfort had survived Red Bull's first attempt to improve the car. The problem had not vanished. It had become more detailed, more specific, and potentially more difficult to solve. Because now Red Bull was no longer chasing one clear weakness. The team had to protect front-end response, stabilize the rear underbraking, investigate the wing concern, correct the driver's seating discomfort, and somehow preserve the pace that had already placed Verstappen near the front. One wrong adjustment could make another problem worse, give the front of the car more aggression, and the rear may become even less stable. Protect the rear too much, and the car may refuse to turn, change the braking balance, and the tires may begin behaving differently, solve the driver's comfort, and the physical changes may affect how he feels the car in another way. Every solution carried a risk, but the biggest problem was still hidden. Verstappen had produced competitive lap times despite all of this. That meant Red Bull had to answer an uncomfortable question. Was the car genuinely close to the leaders? Or was Verstappen covering up a much deeper weakness with his driving? The next part of the weekend would depend on Red Bull finding the answer before qualifying. Because once Friday ended, the margin for experimentation began to disappear, and the pressure was about to become far greater. The pressure inside the Red Bull garage was not limited to the car. Verstappen had already spent part of the morning under investigation by the FIA after an incident involving the Williams of Carlos Sainz. At turn 12, Verstappen reacted toward the slower car ahead. Race control noticed. The investigation was opened, and for a brief period, Red Bull faced another uncertainty on top of the technical problems already consuming the session. Verstappen was eventually cleared. No penalty followed. Sainz received a warning for erratic driving in front of the Alpine of Aaron at turn 9, and the matter ended without serious sporting consequences. But the damage was not measured in championship points. It was measured in disruption. Practice sessions are built around carefully planned runs. The team sends a car out with a particular fuel load, tire compound, and setup. The driver must then complete clean laps so the engineers can compare one change with another. Traffic ruins that process. A slow car in the wrong place can destroy the preparation lap. It can cool the tires. It can interrupt the driver's concentration. It can make the data from the next lap almost useless.